Imagine a man so blinded by his own belief in divine protection that he threw caution to the wind, ignoring the hard-won wisdom of seasoned sailors and soldiers. This is the story of Ferdinand Magellan, a Portuguese explorer who, in his final days, became a different person altogether. His reckless decision to lead a small, untrained group of men into a battle on the island of Mactan in the Philippines in 1521 would cost him his life and nearly derail one of the greatest voyages in history. Magellan had always been a careful and methodical leader. He had learned the art of naval warfare from his experiences with the Portuguese in East Africa, India, Morocco, and Malaya. These lessons had taught him the importance of deception, secrecy, and surprise. But by the time he reached the Philippines, something had changed. Magellan had become a man possessed by a newfound faith, convinced that he was invincible because of his connection to God and the Virgin Mary. This faith made him overlook the very principles that had once guided him. In late April 1521, Magellan made a series of decisions that would seal his fate. He was planning to invade the island of Mactan, home to a tribe led by a chieftain named Lapu-Lapu. The Spanish monarch had specifically ordered Magellan to remain with the fleet and not to participate in any landing parties, but Magellan ignored this directive. He was determined to lead the attack himself, believing that his divine protection would ensure his success. Magellan's officers, including his brother-in-law Duarte Barbosa, tried to dissuade him. They reminded him of the fate of Juan Diaz de Solis, who had also ignored similar warnings and was killed at the Rio de la Plata, but Magellan was unfazed. He announced to everyone, both Spaniards and Filipinos, that he would attack Mactan on Saturday, April 27th, a day he considered lucky. He even invited the people of Cebu to come and watch the battle, as if it were some sort of spectacle. Professional fighters know the importance of studying the terrain and understanding the conditions of the battle. Magellan, however, was so confident in his divine protection that he failed to consider these crucial factors. He did not realize that Mactan was surrounded by a reef, which would prevent his ships from providing covering fire during the attack. This oversight would prove to be a critical mistake. Magellan also spurned the offers of help from the local chieftains. Raja Humaban of Cebu offered to send 1,000 veteran warriors, and Crown Prince Lum, I suggested a diversionary attack to take the enemy by surprise. Cacique Zula, a rival of Lapu-Lapu, even offered to attack the flank of the rebel chief as the Spaniards waded ashore. But Magellan, in his arrogance, declined all these offers. He believed that he and his men could handle the job alone, without any assistance. The strategy Magellan chose was not entirely without precedent. European explorers and conquerors had often used their superior firepower to gain the loyalty of local tribes by defeating their enemies. This approach had worked for explorers like Champlain in Canada, Cortés in Mexico, and the English in the Carolinas. However, Magellan's situation was different. He had already established good relations with the people of Cebu, and his decision to provoke a conflict with Mactan was seen as unnecessary and foolish by many of his men. Had Magellan chosen the right men and enough of them, he might have succeeded. The natives of Mactan, while numerous, were undisciplined and armed with primitive weapons. A well-equipped force of 150 Spaniards, led by experienced officers like Gomez de Espinosa, could have easily defeated them. But Magellan, in his desire to demonstrate the power of Christian soldiers, limited his landing party to just 60 men. He insisted on leading only volunteers, which meant that many of the tough Marines stayed on the ships, deeply offended by his decision. The result was a motley group of unseasoned cooks, stewards, and cabin boys men, who were unfamiliar with their weapons and inadequately protected by armor. They were issued corselets and helmets, but not greaves or leg armor, which would prove to be a fatal oversight. Magellan also excluded the members of the council from the landing party because they had disapproved of his plan, leaving him as the only officer in charge. On the eve of the battle, Magellan sent an ultimatum to Lapu-Lapu, offering him a chance to avoid conflict. He demanded that Lapu-Lapu acknowledge the suzerainty of Cebu's Christian king, accept the Spanish sovereign as his overlord, and pay tribute to Magellan. Lapu-Lapu, however, was not intimidated. He replied with a message that mocked the Spaniards, saying that his men were also armed with lances made from the finest bamboo and fire-hardened stakes. He even asked the Spaniards to delay their attack until morning, so that his forces could be greater. Magellan, overestimating the intelligence of his foe, believed this was a trick to lure him into a night attack, so he postponed the operation. But this decision hardly mattered, as the landing party arrived in the dark anyway. After a brief row, the 3 boats carrying the Spaniards ran aground 3 hours before daybreak. As the sun began to rise, the Spaniards waded through the shallow waters toward the shore. They were met by a well-prepared force of Mactan warriors, who had taken advantage of the delay to fortify their positions. The natives, armed with bamboo spears and fire-hardened stakes, launched a fierce attack. The unarmored legs of the Spaniards were quickly pierced, and they found themselves unable to move effectively in the shallow water. Despite their superior weapons, the Spaniards were overwhelmed by the sheer number and ferocity of the Mactan warriors. Magellan, in the thick of the battle, fought bravely but was soon struck down. The men around him panicked and retreated, leaving their leader behind. Magellan, the man who had once been so careful and methodical, had fallen victim to his own recklessness and arrogance. The Battle of Mactan was a turning point in the journey of the Magellan-Elcano expedition. It cost the life of its leader and nearly derailed the entire mission. But it also serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of hubris and the importance of listening to the wisdom of those around you. Magellan's tragic end teaches us that even the most experienced leaders can fall victim to their own overconfidence, and that the lessons of the past are there to be heeded, not ignored.